His wife dressed his wounds. They were not deep. The backs of his hands had suffered most, and his wrists. Had he not worn a cap, they would have reached his head. As to the gannet could have split his skull. The children were crying, of course. They had seen the blood on their father's hands. "It's all right now," he told them. "I'm not hurt, just a few scratches. You play with Johnny, Jill. Mammy will wash these cuts." He half shut the door to the scullery so that they could not see. His wife was ashen. She began running water from the sink. "I saw them overhead," she whispered. "They began collecting just as Jill ran in with Mr. Trigg. I shut the door fast and it jammed. That's why I couldn't open it at once when you came." "Thank God they waited for me," he said. "Jill would have fallen at once. One bird alone would have done it." Furtively, so as not to alarm the children, they whispered together as she bandaged his hands and the back of his neck. "They're flying inland," he said. "Thousands of them. Rooks, crows, all the bigger birds. I saw them from the bus stop. They're making for the towns." "But what can they do, Nat?" "They'll attack, go for everyone out in the streets. Then they'll try the windows, the chimneys." "Why don't the authorities do something? Why don't they get the army, get machine guns, anything?" "There's been no time. Nobody's prepared. We'll hear what they have to say on the 6 o'clock news." Nat went back into the kitchen, followed by his wife. Johnny was playing quietly on the floor. Only Jill looked anxious. "I can hear the birds," she said. "Listen, Dad." Nat listened. Muffled sounds came from the windows, from the door. Wings brushing the surface, sliding, scraping, seeking a way of entry. The sound of many bodies pressed together, shuffling on the sills. Now and again came a thud, a crash, as some bird dived and fell. "Some of them will kill themselves that way," he thought, "but not enough, never enough." "All right," he said aloud. "I've got the boards over the windows, Jill. The birds can't get in." He went and examined all the windows. His work had been thorough. Every gap was closed. He would make extra certain, however. He found wedges, pieces of old tin, strips of wood and metal, and fastened them at the sides to reinforce the boards. His hammering helped to deafen the sound of the birds, the shuffling, the tapping, and more ominous, he did not want his wife or the children to hear it, the splinter of cracked glass. "Turn on the wireless," he said. "Let's have the wireless." This would drown the sound also. He went upstairs to the bedrooms and reinforced the windows there. Now he could hear the birds on the roof, the scraping of claws, a sliding, jostling sound. He decided they must sleep in the kitchen, keep up the fire, bring down the mattresses and lay them out on the floor. He was afraid of the bedroom chimneys. The boards he had placed at the chimney bases might give way. In the kitchen they would be safe because of the fire. He would have to make a joke of it, pretend to the children they were playing at camp. If the worst happened and the birds forced an entry down the bedroom chimneys, it would be hours, days perhaps, before they could break down the doors. The birds would be imprisoned in the bedrooms. They could do no harm there. Crowded together, they would stifle and die. He began to bring the mattresses downstairs. At the sight of them, his wife's eyes widened in apprehension. She thought the birds had already broken in upstairs. "All right," he said cheerfully. "We'll all sleep together in the kitchen tonight. More cosy here by the fire. Then we shan't be worried by those silly old birds tapping at the windows." He made the children help him rearrange the furniture, and he took the precaution of moving the dresser, with his wife's help, across the window. It fitted well. It was an added safeguard. The mattresses could now be laid, one beside the other, against the wall where the dresser had stood. "We're safe enough now," he thought. "We're snug and tight, like an air raid shelter. We can hold out. It's just the food that worries me. Food and coal for the fire. We've enough for 2 or 3 days, not more. By that time, no use thinking ahead as far as that. And they'd be given directions on the wireless. People would be told what to do. And now, in the midst of many problems, he realized that it was dance music only coming over the air, not children's hour as it should have been. He glanced at the dial. Yes, they were on the home service all right. Dance records? He switched to the light program. He knew the reason. The usual programs had been abandoned. This only happened at exceptional times, elections and such. He tried to remember if it had happened in the war, during the heavy raids on London. But of course the BBC was not stationed in London during the war. The programmes were broadcast from other temporary quarters. We're better off here, he thought. We're better off here in the kitchen, with the windows and the doors boarded, than they are up in the towns. Thank God we're not in the towns. At 6 o'clock, the records ceased. The time signal was given. No matter if it scared the children, he must hear the news. There was a pause after the pips. Then the announcer spoke. His voice was solemn, grave, quite different from today. "This is London," he said. "A national emergency was proclaimed at 4 o'clock this afternoon. Measures are being taken to safeguard the lives and property of the population, but it must be understood that these are not easy to effect immediately, owing to the unforeseen and unparalleled nature of the present crisis. Every householder must take precautions to his own building, and where several people live together, as in flats and apartments, they must unite to do the utmost they can to prevent entry. It is absolutely imperative that every individual stay indoors tonight, and that no one at all remain on the streets or roads or anywhere outdoors. The birds in vast numbers are attacking anyone on sight and have already begun an assault upon buildings, but these, with due care, should be impenetrable. The population is asked to remain calm and not to panic. Owing to the exceptional nature of the emergency, there will be no further transmission from any broadcasting station until 7 a.m. tomorrow." They played the national anthem. Nothing more happened. Nat switched off the set. He looked at his wife. She stared back at him. "What's it mean?" said Jill. "What did the news say?" "There won't be any more programmes tonight," said Nat. "There's been a breakdown at the BBC." "Is it the birds?" asked Jill. "Have the birds done it?" "No," said Nat. "It's just that everyone's very busy, and then of course they have to get rid of the birds, messing everything up in the towns. Well, we can manage without the wireless for one evening." "I wish we had a gramophone," said Jill. "That would be better than nothing." She had her face turned to the dresser, backed against the windows. Try as they did to ignore it, they were all aware of the shuffling, the stabbing, the persistent beating and sweeping of wings. "We'll have supper early," suggested Nat. "Something for a treat. Ask Mummy. Toasted cheese, eh? Something we all like?" He winked and nodded at his wife. He wanted the look of dread, of apprehension, to go from Jill's face. He helped with the supper, whistling, singing, making as much clatter as he could, and it seemed to him that the shuffling and the tapping were not so intense as they'd been at first. Presently he went up to the bedrooms and listened, and he no longer heard the jostling for place upon the roof. "They've got reasoning powers," he thought. "They know it's hard to break in here. They'll try elsewhere. They won't waste their time with us." Supper passed without incident. Then, when they were clearing away, they heard a new sound, droning, familiar, a sound they all knew and understood. His wife looked up at him, her face alight. "It's planes," she said. "They're sending out planes after the birds. That's what I said they ought to do all along. That will get them. Isn't that gunfire? Can't you hear guns?" It might be gunfire out at sea. Nat couldn't tell. Big naval guns might have an effect upon the girls out at sea, but the girls were inland now. The guns couldn't shell the shore because of the population. "It's good, isn't it," said his wife, "to hear the planes?" And Jill, catching her enthusiasm, jumped up and down with Johnny. "The planes will get the birds. The planes will shoot them." Just then they heard a crash about 2 miles distant, followed by a second, then a third. The droning became more distant, passed away to sea. "What was that?" asked his wife. "Were they dropping bombs on the birds?" "I don't know," answered Nat. "I don't think so." He did not want to tell her that the sound they had heard was the crashing of aircraft. It was, he had no doubt, a venture on the part of the authorities to send out reconnaissance forces, but they might have known the venture was suicidal. What could aircraft do against birds that flung themselves to death against propeller and fuselage, but hurtled to the ground themselves? This was being tried now, he supposed, over the whole country, and at a cost. Someone high up had lost his head. "Where have the planes gone, Dad?" asked Jill. "Back to base," he said. "Come on now, time to tuck down for bed." It kept his wife occupied, undressing the children before the fire, seeing to the bedding, one thing and another, while he went round the cottage again, making sure that nothing had worked loose. There was no further drone of aircraft, and the naval guns had ceased. "Waste of life and effort," Nat said to himself. "We can't destroy enough of them that way. Cost too heavy. There's always gas. Maybe they'll try spraying with gas, mustard gas. We'll be warned first, of course, if they do. There's one thing, the best brains of the country will be onto it tonight.